A lot of you have been asking for this, so today is part one of covering the absolute basics in both woodworking and carpentry terminology. Not only will today's video cover the terms, but I'll also intertwine some tools as well because it plays such a huge part in understanding the terminology. Now, if I zoom out a bit on the video and hover over the timeline below, you can see that it's actually broken up into four major sections: lumber, plywood, measuring and marking, which is a combined section, and hand tools. Now, I've laid this video out in this way to make it easier for you to navigate around, especially in the future when you need a quick refresher. One of the most important groups of terms to learn right out of the gate is to learn about the material in which you'll be using to build all your stuff. So, for the purpose of this video, both lumber or wood will refer to construction material, material that's used to build houses, and material that's used to build furniture. So, with that, let's dive into learning about some of the basic terms used for lumber or wood. In its rawest form, wood can be broken up into two categories: hardwoods and softwoods. Hardwoods come from deciduous trees, that is, trees that drop their leaves, like oak, cherry, or maple. So the poplar I have here is considered a hardwood, but by no means is this actually hard like maple. So why is it a hardwood? Simply because it came from a tree that drops its leaves. Another important thing to know about hardwoods is that they grow slower, and the wood fibers are more dense, making the wood much stronger. Softwoods, on the other hand, come from conifer trees, trees like pine, fir, cedar, and of course they have needles and not leaves. Softwood trees grow faster and produce wood that is less dense and in general weaker than hardwood. Rough cut lumber, RGH, is lumber that is, well, rough, and in most cases you can still see the saw marks from the mill. Rough lumber is sold by the 1/4 inch in its thickness, and its width can vary just depending on what's available in your area. For example, a 4/4 board measures around 1 inch thick, a 6/4 1.5 inches, an 8/4 2 inches, and 12/4 3 inches. Lumber like this can be used for rustic projects, or it can be sized down by using a jointer and a planer for furniture. Moving on, the term face is used to describe the large flat part of the board, while the edge is used to describe the smaller edge of the board. End grain refers to the end of the board, where the end of the grain is most visible. Grain or grain pattern is the visual look that the grain makes as it runs through the board. It's what makes wood so beautiful. Once the lumber does get sized down, it's called dressed lumber. That is, lumber that has been sized and shaped and smoothed to a nice flat surface. For example, S4S, which stands for surfaced on 4 sides, is lumber that is found at most big box stores. It's dimensioned and finished on 4 sides, ready to use. There is also S2S lumber, which is surfaced on 2 sides. Both faces are planed, but as you can see, the edges are still raw and rough. Dimensional lumber is lumber that is sized to a standard final dimension, like framing lumber, like a 2x4, 2x6, or 2x8, and it also refers to a 1x4 or 1x6 and so on. But don't be tricked with these numbers, because dimensional lumber is sold using its rough size, not its actual size. So for example, when you buy a 2x4 at the store, it doesn't measure 2 inches by 4 inches, but measures 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And a 1x4 doesn't measure 1 inch by 4 inch, but measures 3/4 of an inch by 3.5 inches. Most often, the lumber that we've been discussing has been kiln dried, meaning that it's been put inside of a kiln. A kiln is basically a big oven to reduce the moisture content of the lumber. Wood that is wet will eventually dry out and shrink on its own. But by using a kiln, it does it in a more controlled environment that's slower, producing a much better product at the end. However, in the carpentry world, there is a product called PT lumber, or pressure treated lumber, which is really wet. This lumber is treated with chemicals that resist rot and insects, which makes it a great choice for outdoor projects. No matter what wood you buy, there are 6 common defects to look out for. Number 1 is a cup. A cup is when the board or the lumber is curved up in this direction on the face of the wood. Number 2 is a twist. A twist is when the board twists this way at one end and the opposite direction in the other. Number 3 is a crook. A crook is when the board or lumber bends to the right or to the left in the direction of the edge of the material. Number 4 is a bow. A bow is similar to a crook, but this time the board bends in the direction of the face. 5 is a check. A check is when the board or lumber has a crack, but the crack doesn't go all the way through the thickness of the material. And number 6, similar to a check, the split is when the crack goes all the way through the material. Plywood is a man-made wood product that is made from multiple layers or plies of thin wood veneer. These veneers are then glued together at 90-degree angles to each other to produce a flat, large, stable sheet of material. Plywood is often graded by its surface and how many plies it has. So for example, the fewer the plies, the weaker the plywood, or the less stable it is. The more plies it has, the more stable it is, the stronger it is. For example, this half-inch construction grade plywood has 4 plies, sold in 4x8 sheets, and has a pretty rough surface even after it's been sanded. The next type to look at is finished plywood. Finished plywood has 1 or 2 outside thin veneers, oftentimes hardwood, that produces a really good smooth surface. For example, this sheet of finished plywood came from Home Depot, and it has 2 thin outer veneers of birch and 5 interior plies for a total of 7 plies. The last type of plywood to look at is Baltic birch, and here in the US, Baltic birch might be the highest level or quality of plywood that you can buy. For example, this piece of 13mm or 3/4 inch here in the United States has 2 thin outside veneers and 11 interior plies for a total of 13 plies, making this a very strong and very stable material. All plywood, no matter what it is, comes in multiple thicknesses. So just know that the examples that I just showed you is just the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. The first term to explore here is the term square. In carpentry and woodworking, it refers to checking the squareness of the faces, edges, or the ends of boards. It also refers to checking if something you're building has equal diagonal measurements, which verifies that it is indeed square. The term square is also used to label a group of tools that are specifically designed to mark and check for squareness. Let's look at 4 of them. The first is a precision square. These squares are made out of metal with little to no moving parts. That's what makes them so precise. The second is the speed square. This tool is used mainly in carpentry, but it also can be used in woodworking as well. Third is the combination square. This tool is great at so many things around the shop, and it provides very accurate angles, and it can be used to set and measure depth as well. Lastly is the framing square. The framing square is used for, well, you guessed it, for framing houses. And it's also really good at checking cabinets for square before nailing. The next term or tool to look at is a sliding bevel. Sliding bevels are great for laying out different angles or for transferring those angles from one piece to another. A straight edge refers to any straight material used to mark, measure, or cut straight lines. So for example, here I have 2 metal straight edges that are great for small layout tasks and small projects. And here I have a larger straight edge that can actually be clamped to something like plywood to help cut a straight line. Now when it comes to measuring larger items, the metal tape measure is a good choice. And as you can see, it comes in different sizes and different shapes. When it comes to actually making the marks, a good old number 2 pencil works great. So does a carpenter's pencil. And when you're working with rough lumber, these white charcoal pencils work fantastic too. The last term I want to cover in this section is the term layout. Layout simply means to measure, mark, and arrange all the needed components to complete a project. This term can also be used as a verb. So for example, someone might say, I'm going to go and lay out that window. Let's start this section off by talking about handsaws. Handsaws is a general term and can be used to describe many different types of saws. The first type is what I'll call a traditional saw. These are the classic looking handsaws that most people can easily recognize. Nowadays these saws come in all different shapes and sizes, and most of them though still cut on the push stroke, meaning that they cut mostly in the forward direction. Next are pull saws, also known as Japanese saws. They are absolutely fantastic saws. Great for control, flexibility, and require less effort because they cut on the pull stroke. The last saw to look at is the back saw. The back saw, again, is a general term. It's used to describe any saw that has a stiffened rib along the back of the saw. This rib greatly reduces any flexing that the blade may encounter while in use, because the less flex, the straighter the cut. Let's shift gears real quick and talk about two terms as it pertains to cutting wood. The first term is kerf. The kerf of the blade is how wide the blade is, and ultimately how wide of a cut it leaves behind in the wood. The second term is offcut. The offcut is any piece of material that you don't want, or the waste after the cut is finished. The offcut isn't necessarily always waste though. It may simply mean the piece that you're not intending to use after the cut is complete. Alright, let's finish this video off by talking about a few terms and tools used for shaping wood. First up is the wood chisel. There are many different sizes and shapes available, and they're all great tools for shaping wood. Next is the hand plane. Hand planes, again, is a general term. So for example, I have a block plane here that is used to shape edges of stock and to remove material where needed. The other plane I have is a jack plane, and as you can see, it's much larger than the previous one, and this one's great for general purpose planing and for shaping and flattening. One term that's used often around things that need sharpened, like chisels and planes, is the word hone. Hone simply means to sharpen something. The last tool we're going to look at today is this, the wood rasp. Wood rasps, like all tools, come in many different sizes and shapes, but they're all great for quickly roughing out and shaping edges and the faces of stock. Well, that does it for part one. Next week in part two, we're going to be covering power tools, types of cuts, types of trim and molding, and window and cabinet parts. I hope this video has been helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing to the channel. I look forward to seeing everybody next week.